All right, so we want to write an algorithm to find the largest temperature value on a Sunday. In this case, we only need to iterate across rows. We're going to keep the column constant. So in my program, I could, if I wanted to, say column equals 0. That's because I'm using the value 0 to mean Sunday. I'm imagining that the column at position 0 is Sunday, and the column at position 1 is Monday, and so on. The column at position 6 is Saturday. If you wanted to create an alternate view of which days correspond to which data values, which columns in the table, that would be completely fine. I know in some cultures, they imagine that the day of the week starts on a Monday or Saturday or some other day, and it would be completely fine to kind of adhere to those cultural norms in your program. Just leave a comment that says something like Sunday equals column 0. As long as you're consistent in your program, people are going to be able to follow along with that just fine. So I'm going to keep the column constant, and I'm only going to iterate across rows in my table. So I'm going to say for row equals 0, row is less than the weeks in my study, row plus plus. And if I want to find the largest temperature value, I need a variable to help me store that. I'm going to call it largest temp. And just like before, we could set it to one of the data values from the table, or we could set it to a really small data value, whichever one made more sense to us in the program. I'm going to initialize it to temperature at position row 0, column 0, one of the actual data values that's part of column 0 in my table. And then I'm going to check to see if my temperature value at position row column is bigger than my largest temperature. And if it is, then I'm going to update the value of largest temp so that it's my current temperature value. And then curly bracket there. And again, I only know that I found the largest when I get to the end of the iteration process. So after I've looked at all the data values, then I can say, I found the biggest one. Awesome. So if we're looking through our example array, visually, we can see really quickly that the largest temperature value on a Sunday is 56.1. Let's see if that's what we get when we run our program. Yep, sure enough. And that's not the largest value in the table. There are bigger values like the 60.3, 77, and so on. But we're only looking in that one column in the table for Sunday, and the 56.1 is the largest value on a Sunday. Let's change our data just so that we can double check that everything's working well. I'm going to make it the 5.1 in my second row. And then we should see that the 32.4 is the largest value on a Sunday. Yep. But again, we could run our program with the debugger. Let me kill the debugger on the old spot and move it down so that it's in our new loop. I'm going to have it pause right before we start looping through our different rows for column 0. And click the debugger so that I can start that. Remember that the program is still running. It did all the steps up to this point, printed out everything about the entire collection and the smallest temperature value. Now it's pausing on line 36 just before it executes line 37, waiting for us to guide it through the remaining steps. I'm going to press the step over button to move down one instruction. So it just executed the line that initialized column to 0. The next one is going to initialize the row to be 0 and check to see if row is less than weeks, and it is. 0 is less than 2. So I'm going to execute the body of my for loop and check to see if the value at position 0, 0 in the two-dimensional array is bigger than the largest value. And it's not, it's equal. And then I'm going to increase the value of row. So it's going to become 1 and check to see if 1's still less than 2, which it is. I'm going to execute the body of the loop. At this point, we're comparing the value at position 1, 0, because my row increased, my column remains constant. So it's the temperature at row 1, column 0. I'm checking to see if that's bigger than the temperature value. And it's not bigger. The largest temperature value, the 32.4, is still bigger than the current temperature value, which is the 5.1. I'm going to increase the value of the row. So it's going to become 2, and 2 is not less than 2. So it's going to drop out of the loop and be ready to print out the largest temperature value and end the program. Super. So we've looked at some examples in the notes. The next part of the notes asks you to try a program on your own. I challenge you to look at this particular program before class. And in the next class, we'll go over how to create the solution to this so you can check to see if you are correct. In this program, we're going to try to read in quiz score values for a class of students. Suppose there's 3 students and 5 quiz score grades. Write a program that reads all the quiz score values from standard input. So it'll be similar to the structure that we created earlier today, the one where we set up the individual quiz values like this. So you'll need that type of variable declaration where you have 3 rows and 5 columns, and you set up your 2-dimensional array. And then you would think about, how do I make the input process so that in between each row of information, it prompts me for the scores for the next student. So before the first student, it asks us to enter the scores for student 1, then allows us to read in those 5 temperature values, then asks us to enter the scores for student 2, lets us read another 5 temperature values, and so on. Think about how you might set that up. And again, we'll go over the solution for it next time in class.